So without further ado, I'd like to invite my friend and colleague and Chief Technology Officer of Fairfield-Sassoon Unified School District, Tim Goree.
Thank you. That was really nice, Micah. Appreciate that. When we had that conversation, the seriousness of it for Micah was coming through the phone. It was palpable. I think that conversation, I know that conversation actually ended in a prayer because he was so distraught about how he was going to do this for his school district, and I really felt for him. But he has done it, and that's been really exciting to watch from my view as a director of technology for a large school district like Fairfield. We have 22,000 students and 30 schools. We had gone a long way towards one-to-one at the time that Mike and I started talking about that. And because Mike is at a smaller school district, he's surpassed me, just like that. So he got it going, and now all their kids have devices. And I can't say that about my district yet, but it takes a little longer in a big district like that. But it's a joy and a pleasure to be able to work with people like Micah who have the emotion, the passion behind what they're doing, and they know that what they're doing really matters. The presentation I want to bring you today is something I think a little unique, a little different. You probably won't hear this anywhere else. I am an IT guy. I grew up in this field as an IT guy. I had no intention at the beginning of my career over 20 years ago to work in schools. My hope was that I could be a computer programmer and eventually a managed application software manager for a company like Microsoft. That was my aspiration, and along the way, while I was doing getting my bachelor's degree done, I took a job just to get through as a technician for the Kern High School District in Bakersfield. And at that job, I was fortunate to work for a director, an educational director at the district office, and 2 teachers on special assignment I worked with on some special projects that I did. And those 3 guys mentored me. They showed me why my skills were needed in education and helped me fall in love with the educational mission and really changed my life in an important way. And so here I am today, and one of the specialties that I have that I often speak about is how to use IT people properly in the educational mission, how to engage your IT team in the educational mission, and how to quite honestly keep them honest, because sometimes you're told no, and you have this sneaking suspicion that it's possible, right? You've heard that other districts are doing this, but your IT person's like, nope, can't be done. Nope, don't want to do that. And so about a year and a half ago, I was called upon by a guy named John Carippo. Anybody in here know who John Carippo is from Q? John is a crazy guy. He doesn't speak the language that most of us speak. Those who know John well say that John speaks Caripponese, which is a completely different language. And you have to spend a lot of time with John to really understand where he's coming from. He's got all kinds of crazy ideas popping out of his head all the time. And he's always wanting to try to do something new and make a big impact on education. And about a year and a half ago, he came to me and he said, I want, if you've ever heard of the Q Rockstar camps for teachers, John was a big part of making that happen about 7-8 years ago. And he wanted to start an admin version, a leadership version of Q Rockstar camps. And he asked me if I would come and help create the curriculum for that camp and be on the team that would start that. And so I said, well, okay, what do you want to do? What are we going to talk about? What do I have to bring? And he said, well, I want you to put together something that helps principals and superintendents of small districts especially to really keep their IT people honest. I'm like, what do you mean by that? And he says, well, you know how, like, you're not that guy. You do everything you can to try to get the educational mission done. You marshal your folks and you use your IT expertise to really get things done in education. But he said, there's a lot of people who don't do that in IT in schools. And I said, yeah, I know that. And he said, well, how do we give in an hour and a half workshop principals all the tools they need to keep their IT people honest? I said, I don't know. Well, let's work on it. So we put together what I'm calling Earn Your IT Decoder Ring. This is a shortened version of it because we don't have an hour and a half. But one of the things that I found very early on in the process of putting this together and just giving some tips that you can use right away in your, and I think teachers in the room will also be able to take a lot of these things away and use them in their dealings with the IT people in their environment. Is at the end of this presentation, there's a link. It's a Google Slides presentation. I'll give you the link to where you can get to the presentation itself. And then in the presentation, there's actually a link to a document that you can take away with you. It's a companion guide that we developed that really goes into detail. So I'm going to kind of brush on a lot of subjects as we go across this next hour, but really the detail is in the document. So I want to make sure you know that I'm giving you that you can take that away with you and then come back to me later via email or Twitter or whatever and ask questions if you have any questions about that. So we developed this, and this really is, if you hit the next slide, is really the school to home edition, right, of Earn Your IT Decoder Ring. And it's really more of a focus on engaging your IT team, because what I found is, as we'll see, that most of the issues that educators have with their IT folks are actually human issues, right? They're not technical issues. They're, I don't understand where you're coming from issues and why you are the way you are issues. Because IT people are a little different, right? So if you'll go to the next slide, we'll get right into this. First of all, I think one of the important things you have to understand is what motivates IT people. If you understand what motivates them, what gets them excited, and you can connect for them those key motivators to the educational mission that you have, then what you're going to find is a lot more success and a lot better relationships with your IT people. What you'll find is that they'll be willing often to go the extra mile and do the extra work to get done what you need them to get done. So the first thing is logical decision making. IT folks really like to be led by somebody who's a logical decision maker, who they can understand the thinking process of that person. They could be led by teachers, they could be led by principals, they could be led by a director of technology, could be any number of those types of people, but they want them to be logical decision makers. Doesn't mean you have to know anything about IT, okay? You don't have to know anything about IT, but you have to show yourself as a logical decision maker. Nobody that I know has ever said, will ever admit that they are not a logical decision maker, right? You don't make a decision and think, well, that's not logical, but I'm going to make it anyway, right? Everybody thinks they're a logical decision maker, and the reality is most of the time you are going through a thought process that is logical. The trick here is making sure that your thought process is transparent and viewed by the IT folks. There are a lot of people out there who don't need to know what you're thinking or how you got to your idea. IT people do. They need to know that what you're thinking, that your progress, your process through that thinking process is logical. So the answer to how you make sure that they know that you're making logical decisions is to communicate the big picture with them all the time. So they're a group of people who really need to know what's the big picture, what are you trying to get at, and how do they fit in to that? What can their skills do to get you to where you want to be? So sharing things details that may not even seem like they would be interested, you'll find that if you do that on a regular basis, they'll get more bought into the big picture. And then they'll start thinking, well, maybe I can do this to help you with the big picture, right? So share the big picture often. Second one is elegance and simplicity. IT people love things to be elegant. They love systems, and more often than not, great systems are elegant and even simple, right? Is there anything about the educational system that is elegant and simple? Honestly, think about it. I mean, education is a messy process. And as educators, what I've found over the years is that many of you thrive on that mess, right? You actually enjoy this process of getting in, digging your hands in, and helping students get to where they need to be. And that's not a simple process, and it's not an elegant process. Sometimes it's downright ugly. But many of you as educators are comfortable with that. I want to tell you, most of the IT people are not comfortable with that. So what are the things you have to think about as an educator to try to tie your IT person in to the educational mission is to really think about, how can I make sure that the process we're going through is simple and transparent to them so that they can see what it is that you're doing. So we talked a little bit about that in the logical decision making. But the best way to help them deal and grapple with the messiness that school is to give them opportunities to help make your process better. So one of the things that I'll tell people often that I find most people don't realize is that your technology person is first and foremost a process person. They are very good at taking any process, whether it has to do with technology or not, and trying to finding the straightest line between point A and point B, right? So they're good at refining processes, finding flaws in processes, and creating new processes that get you to where you want to go quickly and efficiently. So let them do that. Get them involved in planning processes at your school or in your district, even when that planning process doesn't necessarily have to do with technology. Because when you give them the opportunity to be on that planning team, say your next curriculum adoption, right? Then they get an opportunity to get the back door sort of inside look on what you're doing as an educator. And then they start processing. Usually they have to go home at night and sleep on it. But they'll come back and they'll start shooting out ideas. I saw what you guys were doing with this thing over here when we were in our meeting the other day, and I really give that some thought, and I think it might be a good idea to cut this piece out and just go straight from here to there, and the way you can deal with that is by using this technology and to streamline this process. They'll do that on their own if you give them the opportunity to be involved in planning. So I would highly recommend you do that. Automation of manual tasks and learning and growing are both connected in this context. IT people really like to be able to automate things that are, quite frankly, boring and mundane, right? My mother used to laugh at me when I was a teenager because I started getting into programming and building computers back then. And I would spend hours upon hours upon hours with, and tons of effort to create a program that would do a simple menial task, because I didn't want to do the simple menial task over and over and over again. Right? She would call me lazy because I didn't want to do the task that I needed to do, right? But I wasn't lazy. I just really wanted to not do that task. And I was willing to work really hard to create a process so I didn't have to do that task ever again. Right? And you'll see that a lot of times in your IT folks. That sort of streak, you'll think, wow, they kind of have this lazy sort of feel to them, right? But really, they're not interested in doing menial things. They want to learn all the time. They want to grow all the time. They want to be doing new things, innovative things, interesting things. And that's where when they tap into that interest and that passion, that's when they get really excited and they get energetic and they'll work really hard. So allow them to automate the things around your school and your district that are menial, especially that have to do with their jobs. If they come and say, I think I can do that, I find a way to do this better, let them do it. Let them spend the time to do that and let them learn and grow. I think one of the things that you'll find too is, if you really think about it, is even in an educational organization, your IT people are likely the best learners in the organization. They don't need a class to go to and learn something, right? They don't need even a book. They will go out and hunt the information they need down, kill it and eat it for dinner. They love to learn all the time, but they don't learn the way that school typically wants people to learn. So you have to recognize that, but give them opportunities to learn and grow. If they stagnate, you get one of two things. Either your good people, if they're stagnating, will leave, and you don't want your good people to leave. Or your marginal people, if they're not learning and growing, will do less and less and less until they're ineffectual in your organization. And you don't want that either. We can go to the next slide. So here's where it gets real. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm going to make sure that you understand, because I think a lot of people do these things and they don't even realize they're doing it, or that it's something that's incredibly irritating to their IT staff. And I'm going to say some things that I'm sure you've heard before as we go through this, but the first one is really important. How many times are your IT people stopped in the hallway and the first thing that's said to them is, I have a problem, right? And it's not like a normal person, right? It's not like, hey, how was your weekend? How are your kids, right? How's your wife or husband doing? No. The first thing you say to them as you stop them in the hall frantically is, my computer won't boot up, right? And when you're doing that, honestly, you're not acknowledging the fact that they're a human being. And I know it seems like a little thing because you have a problem and you need to deal with it right now. But the reality is, if they're getting that from every staff member at your school site on a regular basis, it really wears on them after a while. It really does. And they are likely not to feel like they're a part of your team over a period of time if they feel like they're just a tool to be used by you instead of a human being. So make sure that in all of that you're doing, the things that you would do if you're a principal for your teachers, make sure you're doing those kinds of things for IT people too. Acknowledge their humanity. I mean, I've gotten this from my mother. I get a phone call. I haven't talked to my mother in 2 weeks, and I got a phone call the other day from my mom, and there it is on my cell phone. I pick it up and, hey, Mom, how's it going? She's all, pretty good. Hey, I have a computer problem. Seriously. I haven't talked to my mother in 2 weeks, and it's not, how are the kids? How's your wife? How are you doing, son? No, it's, I have a computer problem. So, just give that some thought. I cannot tell you how many times as an IT person I have been in a situation where I've been told that we're going to do something that I had no involvement in the planning process for. And as I get into what has already been purchased for me to implement, there are all kinds of problems with the thing we purchased that isn't going to work in our environment. And this piece, this not getting IT people involved in the planning of your big initiatives, especially your one-to-one initiatives at the very beginning, and allowing them to have a voice, is really a crusher for your IT people. You know, it basically says you have no respect at all for them as people, and for their input. Now, we're going to address some other things. I understand that sometimes there are situations where there have been interactions with your IT folks that make it so that you're not sure you want them at the planning table. And that's something else to address entirely. But that's actually not an excuse. You've got to get them involved in planning at the beginning, because they do have information that you're going to need to know as you're making purchases and planning and implementation that could make or break the entire thing. So you've got to get them involved in planning. And then blaming them. We're systems. Okay, so how many times have you seen an interaction or been involved in an interaction? I know I have a lot, where the assumption when something goes wrong is that IT changed something and that's what broke it, or the system is broken, right? I can tell you 90% of the time when I get a help ticket, our staff gets help tickets, and what they're getting is, Aries, our student information system's not working correctly. It was working yesterday, now it's not. What did you guys do? Or Aries is not working again, this system sucks, right? And maybe the system does suck. I'm not saying it doesn't, but okay? I'm not saying it does, I'm not saying it doesn't, but blaming the system or blaming the IT support person for the problem when you start saying here's what the problem is not a good idea. Because we have the data, I'll tell you this right, this is absolute truth. We have the data that shows that about 90% of the problems are user error. Okay? Even if you don't believe that, that's okay. If you don't believe that, I totally get it. I understand. But that's what your IT people believe, right? So you're going to immediately start your interaction with your IT folks on a bad foot, right? By saying, what did you do to break this system? The reality is, most of the time, you know, a calm IT person, somebody who does a good job, is going to come, have the bedside manner that they need to have. They're going to ask the probing questions, and they're going to get down to the problem. And most of the time, it's, you know, somebody's doing something a little incorrectly, or maybe the interface has changed, but not because the IT person did something wrong, just because things change, right? And so blaming them, blaming systems right off the bat, not a good idea. Honestly, you would go a long ways to create a better relationship with your IT folks if you were able to start all your conversations or all your help tickets with, maybe it's me, but here's what's going on. I'm not quite sure. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. I'm telling you, if you would do that, if you would start it like, even if you know for sure, right? Even if you know for sure that it's not you, right? Just starting going, you know, it could be me. I think I might be making a mistake. Could you help me try to figure out this problem? I'm not quite sure what I'm doing wrong. And if the IT person finds out it's a system issue, I guarantee the IT person's going to go, you know what, I'm sorry, something's not right with this, and we're going to fix it. It's not you. And if it is you, they're going to be a lot more gracious too. So, you know, that's just a tip. Start out, you know, assume that it's you. You've nothing to lose but just a tiny bit of pride. And it really helps your relationship a lot with your IT people. Okay. How many people have your IT people start every conversation when you say, I have a problem with technology, and the first thing they say back to you is, can you put in a ticket? Right? And that's annoying, right? It's irritating. You're like, well, this ticket system is just one more layer of bureaucracy that I have to go through. And here I am trying to save the world and help kids, and you're telling me to put in a ticket. Really? Right. I understand. However, there's a reason we have ticket systems, okay? There's a couple of reasons, really good reasons, why we have ticket systems that you need to understand. One is, if all of our issues are in tickets, we can quantify on a regular basis what work we're doing. And we can more effectively, especially me in my position as a director, I can more effectively lobby the superintendent and the CBO for more staff if I can show the amount of work that we're doing. That work that doesn't go into a ticket system is work that we can't prove we did. So if you think you need more IT staff for support at your school, make sure all your problems go into the ticket system, right? Because that really helps them get a good sense of what's really happening out there. We know a lot of IT people do a lot of don't even do, they do work that never goes in the ticket system. In a sense, you're really disservicing your IT person because their bosses never get a sense of the amount of work they really do. So if you could think of it that way, it sure would help. And so if you come to the conclusion that, yeah, it's a good thing to go ahead and use ticket systems and make sure you're putting all that work in, then don't complain about how long it takes to solve a problem when you never put a ticket in the first place for it. So I can tell you how many times I get a phone call at my level from a teacher or a principal who says, I've been waiting for 2 months for this thing to get done, and I'm done. I've had it with waiting. I need it done now. And they may have been waiting for 2 months. But when I go in the ticket system and they put the ticket in 2 days ago, how are we supposed to know, right? So a lot of times I find that it's things like that. They seem like little things, but they really make a big impact on the relationship that you can have with your IT folks. So make sure you put those tickets in right away, because if you put those tickets in, now you've got a record, and if it does wait 2 months to get fixed, you've got it on the record that it's been waiting 2 months, and now that discipline can happen, whatever needs to happen, can happen to deal with that. But when you get that situation where you haven't correctly reported the problem, then it makes it difficult for us to fix it. So just give that some thought. Let's go to the next slide. Here's some common conflicts that we run into when we're dealing with one-to-one programs especially. Boy, I woke up with bad throats. I apologize. I'd probably choke on it, honestly. But thank you. I appreciate that. So often we'll find that educational staff feel like the IT people are demanding too much control over devices. Often we have complaints about wanting to lock down a device so that it can only do certain things, so it can't do the bad things that you wouldn't want kids to be doing, that sort of thing. Here's an idea that I want to propose to you, is that most IT people will be willing to let go of some of those demands, if not all of those demands of control, if you can show that there's good accountability on the back end when somebody does something they shouldn't do with the technology. Okay, so here's what I mean. What I found is that as I've talked to IT people, because I often go into other districts and get to consult with them and help them through some of the issues that they're having from a process perspective. And what I often find is there's that complaint. The IT people want too much control. We need more freedom so that the kids can do what they need to do on the devices. And then when you go talk to the IT person says, every time kids do something that they shouldn't be doing, there are no consequences. And so I feel like I need to have control on the front end to make up for the fact that there doesn't seem to be any accountability on the back end. And I find that kind of interesting. So often then you'll go back to the educational folks and you'll find out there is accountability on the back end, but the IT person doesn't see it, right? They're not clued into the process. So one of the things that I would suggest, if you're having that issue of feeling like the IT people are demanding a lot of control when you don't feel like they really need that, or they're really locking things down for students in a one-to-one environment, is to get together with them and involve them in developing a standard accountability practice for the things that can go wrong and the things that kids can do that they shouldn't be doing with either the device or the internet, right? So get them involved in developing the accountability plan. Because you may already have the accountability plan, as many principals have this down pat. I mean, they know how to deal with discipline. They do it every day. Many of them have gotten to the point where even the technology stuff, they treat it like every other kind of discipline in their school, which they should. But the IT people often don't see that. So you may have a plan already, but sit down with your IT people and say, you know, I'm concerned. I'm wondering if maybe some of the control that you want to have on the front end is because you're not sure that students are being held accountable for what they're doing on the back end. Can you help me develop a plan to make sure that we are keeping people accountable? And if we do, would you be willing to loosen the reins a little bit on control on the front end? And you might find that IT people are really open to that idea. So then you just develop that plan together, then that you've exposed, here's what you're going to do. Then when you actually go through that process of disciplining a student for something that they've done, having to do with technology, if the IT person has at all been involved in that process of finding out that the kid did it, because often they are, right? Like they'll be the one to tell you that the logs from the internet are showing these kids going to these websites and they shouldn't, or they're the one to find out, to look and see that this is happening, or to be called in to research and see if the cache on the computer is showing certain things. If they're involved at all in the process of finding out that something has gone awry, then make sure you follow up at the end of the process and let them know what you did to hold that student accountable. And what you'll find, I think, is the IT people will start going, okay, I feel better that what should be happening is happening. So now I can let go of some of the control on the front end, feeling like that's not their responsibility anymore. And then the second thing that we often run into is we'll have IT people saying, we can't do this or that because it's against the law. Have any of you heard of that? Or heard your IT people say, we can't open up this website because it's against Child Internet Protection Act? No? Well, you guys are so advanced. Really? Have you heard that a little bit? Okay, so I mean, sometimes you have a situation like that where IT people say, nope, can't do it, it's against the law. First of all, make sure you actually read the law. Ask them what law is it that's against, and then go read the law. Because what we find a lot, I find as an IT administrator, I go and speak a lot at the SETPA conference, and SETPA is sort of the preeminent organization in California for helping technology people in schools at best practices and that sort of thing. And we have a lot of IT people in schools out there who are absolutely convinced that certain things are against the law when they're just not. Okay? And it's because they've heard from somebody else on a listserv, or they went to a conference and somebody said something and they misunderstood, or they're all perpetuating this idea that this interpretation of the law that's very stringent. So I would highly recommend you just read the law, because what you'll find is that in most of the laws that have to do with restrictions on what you can do on the internet with students, especially, the board of your school district almost always has the power. Meaning, the law will say something along the lines of, you must have a filtering solution in place. It doesn't say what you have to filter other than broad categories of pornography, which is obvious. You want to filter that stuff. But beyond that, it doesn't really say. And then when you get to the bottom of the text of the law, what it almost always says is, these things are basically defined by the Board of Education of the school district. So if you put forth a policy at your school district level and explain it well and get it passed by your board, you have a lot of freedom. You can do a lot of things, right? You can do almost anything you want to do if your board approves of it. Almost anything. So all of these things about, we can't buy, what was mentioned last night that I thought was impressive was the school district being willing to help students purchase low-cost internet access at their homes. Not a lot of school districts are doing that. And honestly, I think most of the time it's because they think that they're going to get crosswise with the law somehow by doing that. Are they able to guarantee that those internet connections are filtered if those internet connections are being provided by the district, right? Those are things that I think a lot of school districts immediately say, we can't do that. But the reality is, if you have a friendly board to technology and has a visionary idea about this, or you can help infuse that to the board as a leader in your organization, you can write policies that will allow you to do those things. Okay, so very few times in the law does the law say, you as a school district cannot do this. Very few times. Almost always leaves it up to the board. So if the board has the power, then you as a leader in your organization have the power to influence your board and write a policy that they can pass that will allow you to do the things you think are right for your students. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Doing pretty good. All right. So I just want to go over a few things in general that we have found in our school district that have helped us with successful one-to-one implementations. Like I said, not every school in our district is one-to-one yet, but we do have 10 schools out of our 30 that are completely one-to-one take-home, where we provide all the devices and they take them home every day. So that's a big deal for us. That is where we want our entire district to be eventually, and we're working toward that goal. We started that process using mostly one-time funds. So in the last few years, our school districts have received a lot of one-time funds. That is now tapering off, and those who haven't had a plan as they've been growing their base of devices to replace those devices with ongoing general funds are going to have some trouble over the next couple of years because budgets are not looking as good as they have for the last few years. So really working now as quickly as you can, if you haven't done this yet, to make sure that there is a replacement fund available that's general fund, that's not categorical, that can't go away, that, you know what I'm saying, is really, really critical, because when we talk to our board early on about trying to do this, what I would say often to them is, every device that we buy for a student today is a promise to buy another one in 3 years, and another one 3 years after that, and another one 3 years after that, forever. And so these are not one-time funds. And I think back in the late 90s and the 2000s, we often treated technology purchases as one-time purchases. And then we got ourselves into trouble with 10-year-old computers because we never had a plan to replace them on the clip that was required. So every device is a promise to purchase another device in a reasonable amount of time. And I can't tell you how important I think this is. I'm a big fan, actually it's my mission in education, to create environments that are relevant, that look like the environments that students run into outside of school. I get frustrated when we settle for less in school districts, when we say that it's okay for a computer to be 10 years old. That's not good enough for our kids. And you would never put up with that in your job, right? Doing your job. I have on my person right now, I've got 3 devices. I've got an iPad, a laptop, and a smartphone. And I wouldn't do without any of them. If I had to do without the iPad, I guess I could. But I wouldn't do without any of them. I use them all in different modes. And we're struggling just to give students one device, hoping that it'll do all the things that we want it to do, right? So that's difficult enough. But when we allow devices to get old, and we say that that's okay, when we honestly, I'm really ambivalent to the idea of taking donations from companies of devices that are 2 years old, because that's not good enough. Kids deserve new devices. And they should have devices that work well and that are relevant to the world outside of school. We don't want school to be a black hole of technology and everywhere else kids go, even kids who struggle in their families with income issues. When they go around, they see better technology in their friends' homes and in the libraries and in the offices that they happen to be at somewhere, anywhere. At gas stations, they see better technology than some of our schools have. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. So we've got to start changing our thinking. And the way that I like to do that is to think about, down at the bottom, it says devices and internet equals electricity. When we got into our budget cuts back in 2009, when things started going very badly, nobody ever came to the board in our school district and said, well, let's turn the lights off. That'll save us some money. Right? Did anybody do that? And yet, I'll tell you this, electricity on average, the cost of electric bills on average has gone up 4 to 5% every year for the last 30 years. That outpaces the cost of living by double. Easy. And yet nobody complains about it. I mean, they may complain about it, but nobody even seriously considers turning the lights out. Why? Because electricity is a utility that we have decided long ago is a right, a human right for students to have in our environment. Devices and internet have reached that place. It is a human right for students to have not just devices and internet, but access to the knowledge of the world, which is the internet, and the tools to create, collaborate, and communicate with others. They have a right to have access to that. In fact, I would say that you can't do Common Core without those things. If you look at the Common Core standards, littered throughout Common Core, you have to communicate, collaborate, and create. You have to communicate and collaborate with people outside of the classroom. How do you do that on a regular basis unless students have access to the internet and devices whenever they need it, right? So I think overall the formula for one-to-one success at the end of the day is starting to think of these services as utilities that people must have. And you carve out the money for it, even if you have to get rid of other things and other programs that, frankly, many of which have been with us 30 or 40 years and may be irrelevant if we look at them closely. And replace some of those things with something that is relevant and is not going away ever. And that's this kind of access. So if once you switch your thinking and you've got that in your mind and you're looking at it that way, it gets a lot easier to find the funds to do these things. And then finally, network infrastructure, super important. You really can't roll out a successful one-to-one program unless your wireless and your physical network are top shape. So you have to put the money and the work into that to make sure that that's good. If you're running around with a bunch of devices but you can't get on the internet, I mean, some of these devices are fairly useless without the internet these days. So give that some thought, and then support staff. That's where most of your money comes from for budget for IT. It's not an easy sell sometimes in some school districts, but come up with a formula. I'll tell you, the way we did it in our district was I sat down with our superintendent early on in this process, and she was absolutely bent on making sure that every student had a device and had access. And so we started talking about what does that environment look like. We didn't have a wireless network yet. Kids didn't have devices other than shared devices in labs. And so we sat down and I said, well, what do you think the end goal of that looks like? And she said, well, every kid's got a device and they're taking them home every day and they've got to have, the right kind of backpacks to store them in or sleeves or whatever, and they've got to have good wireless access because they can't be plugging those things into the walls all the time. And so we were talking about all those things, and I said, what does support look like for that? And if you look at an elementary school that has 500 or 600 or 700 kids, that's going to mean they're going to have 500 or 600 or 700 devices running around that school, right? How much tech time do you think it's going to take to properly support those? And she's like, we'll probably need a full-time tech even at an elementary school, just at an elementary school. And then I knew I had her, right, at that point. So I said, I agree. We need a full-time tech at every school, if we're in that environment. And so we created a plan that every time we bought lumps of devices, we increased our tech staff on a ratio. So, and I didn't allow the purchase of the devices until we got that tech staff justification approved. And that's how we grew our department to a place where now when I talk to other IT directors and other school districts and they ask me how many staff I have, they're like, are you kidding me? How did you get that many people? We just grew it based on the number of devices that we were putting out there. And the number of the proliferation of devices is pretty extreme. It's 6 years ago, we had 5,000 devices in our district total. That includes staff. Today, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 22,000 devices. And so you can't add that amount of devices without adding some staff as well to support that. Otherwise, if the teachers don't feel like they can get a problem solved quickly when they have it, can you really expect them to integrate the technology into their lessons? Probably not, right? It's not really fair. So let's go on to the next slide. And then this is the last thing that I wanted to kind of touch on, and then we'll be done. This is an idea that we came up with in our district. I think is fairly unique. We have this problem in schools, and it's called the expectation that everything be running perfectly on the first day of school. And we want to start everything for the first time also on the first day of school, right? And it makes sense. If you're talking from a curriculum perspective, it does make sense. Why? Because usually you want to give teachers the summer to think about what they're changing in their practice, right? So that when they hit the first day of school, they've got this plan for the whole year, a curriculum plan for the whole year of what they're going to do. But with technology, especially one-to-one implementations for the first time, would like you to kind of think about doing it a little differently. Here's why. While we do start those new curriculum, like new textbooks and that sort of thing on the first day of school, teachers always in those situations have the opportunity to review that curriculum a year ahead of time, or at least the spring ahead of time, right? Many of them have had the opportunity to pilot those things in their classroom and see what's different about it. Then they have the summer to think about what it is that they've seen and how it will impact their new class that they have the next year. We need to kind of create that same situation whenever we're doing a brand new one-to-one implementation. And so what we've done in our district, and it helps even out the workload, by the way, for the tech staff too, because summers are brutal for tech staff. And the first 2 months of school are brutal for the tech staff. They can spend all their time just holding people's hands and helping them getting up and running. If they have to do implementations, first-time implementations at the same time, your support's not going to be very good, right? And so what we did was we started saying, okay, whenever you want to do a new one-to-one implementation at your school, that order for those devices has to go in by the end of January the previous year. So if you want it to start on the first day of school in August, the order has to actually be in January. We won't implement on the first day of August. We'll implement in the spring. We'll make the purchase at the end of January, beginning of February. We'll implement in March or April. And at the end of the year, March, April, May, the teachers get an opportunity to actually see what having devices in their classroom does to their management style, to their curriculum, what they can do. And they get to see it with kids that they've had already all year long, right? Kids that they know, right? So they can see that when they introduce these devices, here's the things that change. Then they get all summer to think about that, and they come back hitting the ground running, already seeing what it looked like in their classroom the year before. That evens out the tech staff work because in that February, March, April timeframe is actually the least busy time usually for tech. And it also forces administrators to plan earlier. One of the things that I really like about this, that I think has been one of the big benefits from it, is that I used to get the question from principals at school sites who were doing a new program or wanting to purchase something. I would get it the week before the purchase deadline in May, and that question would sound something like, what can I get for $10,000? What can I get for the $5,000 I have left in my budget, right? And what I found is, as we have said no, they always want everything to start on the first day of school, right? So they say, no, if you want to start on the first day of school, you have to actually put that order in January. Now I'm getting questions in November, and the questions sound like, because they've got most of their budget still left, the questions now sound like, what's the best technology I can get for this educational purpose? Totally different question, right? What can I buy with the money I have left over versus what should I buy to accomplish this educational purpose? Totally different question. And it is absolutely just asking that question, moving up that deadline, and asking that question earlier than a year, and principals using the first fruits sort of their budget and planning early what they really want to accomplish has absolutely transformed our ability to do great one-to-one implementations, because now the principals are doing proper planning from the beginning. So just give that some thought. If you want to know more information on how that could work in your district, if you aren't doing something like that, please let me know. If you could flash forward to the next slide, to the next one again. There's the slide. If you click on that picture on the right-hand side, that's the companion guide that has all the details written out and even more information than I gave you today. And if you'll go to the next slide, there's my information if you'd like to get in touch with me via Twitter. or email. There's my email. And then that link at the very bottom, that shortened Google link, is the link to this presentation. It's a Google Slides, and I'm happy to let you use it for whatever you want. You can download it and edit it and use it in your own district if you'd like, if that helps at all. Do I have time for questions? Am I done? I'm done. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks, Micah. It's great to talk to you.